At what point do you become an authority? Is it when you hit 100,000 followers, or when a big name brand validates your work, or is it something quieter, something that happens long before anyone calls you an expert? The truth is, authority isn't given, it is built. It happens when you keep showing up, refining your message, and sharing what you know, even when the self-doubt creeps in. Authority isn't about knowing everything, but rather it's about taking up space, speaking up, and leading the conversation instead of waiting for permission. But the thing is, most entrepreneurs and creators never reach that moment because they're too busy second-guessing themselves, and imposter syndrome tells them that they're not expert enough. And that fear of judgment, it keeps them quiet, and the pressure to fit in stops them from standing out. Our guest today, Latasha James, started out by just sharing what she knew, creating consistently, and figuring out things as she went. And then one day she realized people were not just watching her content, but they were searching for it, they were trusting in it, and they were acting on it. Latasha is the founder and creative director of James Plus Park Creative, a social-first video marketing firm serving clients all around the world. Latasha is also the host of the award-winning Freelance Friday Podcast, and she is an educator to freelancers and creative entrepreneurs. So through her courses, her YouTube channel, and podcast content, Latasha has encouraged thousands of people to start and grow their businesses both online and offline. So if you've ever wondered whether your content is good enough or whether you have what it takes to become the go-to person in your space, this episode is for you. Latasha, I'm so curious to know about that first moment for you when you realize that you are building authority, when you are known for your expertise, when you are known for something. What was that first moment like when you realized that this is happening?
I think I have to say it's YouTube. YouTube search in particular. So I use a tool called TubeBuddy. I'm sure you've heard of it, to help me with my SEO and my video titles and things like that. And they have this like tag feature where when you scroll down and you start putting in your tags, it'll give you some suggested tags for your video. And I noticed Latasha James, social media manager, was always coming up. And when I would type into YouTube search, Latasha James, you know how it gives like that predictive next search term, social media manager and social media marketing would pop up. So I think that was where I really realized, okay, that means people are actually searching for these terms together, you know, my name alongside that term.
That's so cool. I mean, to actually have like physical, tangible evidence that the associations are so strong, like that's pretty freaking cool. Roughly what year was this association starting to form?
I would say 2020 was probably the big beginning of the peak, I guess you could say. Yeah, 2020.
Okay. And fast forward to 2025 today.
Yeah.
Are there like more associations that people have formed with Latasha James and another area?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are I would say that is still definitely the biggest one in terms of search, social media marketing, social media management, but definitely like video podcast. Those are big ones as well, which is good because that's kind of something that I'm looking to lean into a little bit more in the years ahead.
I see. So speaking of video podcasts, I know you have not one, but two podcasts right now. So tell me, or let's share with the audience, what would you say your body of work comprises of today?
Yeah, I would say the Freelance Friday podcast is really my baby, if you will. It's been running since 2018, which is wild. It feels like forever and no time at the same time. I can't believe I still have topics to talk about. But yeah, that is kind of my bread and butter of my business. I post every single Friday. And then I also, to your point, I have a podcast with one of my good friends, Ryan, and it's called Content Creator Confessions. And that is very new. We're about 10 episodes in, and we're just kind of diving into the creator economy and what it's like to really be a content creator. And then I also, I have my YouTube channel as well, where I post mostly vlogs about life as a content creator and entrepreneur and tutorials and things like that.
That sounds like a lot of different platform. Like your body of work sounds like it's it's like a very substantial body of work. I'm so curious. So like during that time when you were starting to focus more on let's just say educational content slash starting Freelance Friday, the podcast, what would you say as a creator, as an entrepreneur, what were your biggest insecurities at that point in your journey?
Yeah. Well, I think it's twofold. I think kind of on the mindset, mental side of it, I guess. I I would say maybe some imposter syndrome in that when I started my podcast, I actually was still working my full-time job. So I started Freelance Friday, a podcast all about freelancing, but I was still a corporate full-time worker. And I felt a little imposter syndrome about that because I was like, who am I to be, giving advice when I think there's kind of this stigma, I guess, of you're not a real entrepreneur unless you're working full time in your business or unless you're making multiple six figures or, whatever that bar is. So I think I felt some imposter syndrome about that. And then the other thing I think was an insecurity that I've always had. I grew up with a speech impediment. I still like really struggle to say R. I have to like really think about it. and like it was, I was in speech therapy for years as a kid, and it was something that I grew very insecure about. And so again, it's like, writing always felt very natural to me and very safe because I think that's why started writing and started blogging. But when I'm putting myself on video, and then definitely when I'm putting myself in front of this professional, clear microphone, it's like, oh my gosh, every single insecurity is going to come through the mic.
I my brain is like the wheels are churning in my head because I'm like the fact that even in the earlier parts of your journey there are already feelings of imposter syndrome. There is maybe some insecurity around the way you speak, but yet you still showed up. So
Yeah.
I think that's something that really piques my curiosity because I think for a lot of folks who might be watching this podcast, they have this dream or things that they want to pursue, but
Yeah.
because of their own insecurities, whatever that is for them, they don't start. But why is it that for you, despite the things that maybe were going on in your head, you were still able to move forward? Like was there
Yeah.
a intrinsic motivation? Like what was the driving factor for you?
Yeah, I really think it was my audience, which was small at that time, but I again, it's twofold. I love to create. I have always loved to create and document things. I don't know. I think that just comes from within, and I have always been really shy and introverted, and so I think maybe whereas somebody who's very extroverted and has like a ton of friends, maybe they don't have that same desire to be putting themselves on the internet because they socialize in other ways. But for me, it very much is like a socialization thing and a fun thing. So I think that side was always there. And then when my audience started asking questions and I saw this way that I could help and could serve, because to that first insecurity, the kind of imposter syndrome, well, what do I know? I'm, still working full time. Well, I was still making, a decent income from my freelancing. And so many people wanted to do the same thing. They, maybe had a low paying full time job and wanted to supplement their income or just wanted to start building something. Like I was still a couple steps ahead of those people. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to help somebody who's running $1 million business, while I'm making my $20,000 or whatever of side hustle money, but I can help that person who's struggling financially and wants to make extra money or wants to just start their business or whatever the case may be. So I think it's important to consider that. And I always tell people that because I know that's a common thing of, well, what do I have to teach people, And it's like if you compare yourself to the big guys, the people who are huge, at the top of their game, you're always going to feel inadequate. But if you just focus on the people who you can help instead of who you can't help, it makes it a lot easier to get started.
It always really resonates with me whenever I hear how other creators have like specifically impacted their own audience, because for me, I can think of quite a few major crossroads of my own life where
Yeah.
people around me, like in my personal life, didn't really get it, or they weren't in the same crossroads I was in. But somehow I would find a stranger on the internet, and
Yep.
their story is exactly what I needed to hear at that moment in time. So I always
Yeah.
just love asking other creators like, what are specific moments where you've seen the direct impact of your work? Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. Okay. So I think this would be a really nice transition point for us to now take a look at or chat about one of your past pieces of content. So we will, in the episode, we are going to share a snippet of Latasha's, one of your past videos on YouTube.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Social Notes. Before we hop into today's episode, I want to take a second to thank my patrons for making this episode of Social Notes possible. You guys rock. So the first bit of social media news I want to talk about today is an exciting one. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but Instagram is now allowing landscape video on Instagram TV, aka IGTV, which, as a lot of you know, launched about a year ago now. They have a standalone app. You guys know what IGTV is. I made plenty of videos about it, and their whole shtick was that it was really the first and really the only app that allowed for longer form vertical video content that was mobile only. So the co-founder of Instagram, Kevin Systrom, I don't know, he told a TechCrunch person, what I'm most proud of is that Instagram took a stand and tried a brand new thing that is frankly hard to pull off. Full screen vertical video that's mobile only, that doesn't exist anywhere else. So this news coming about a year later, a lot of people are looking at this as kind of a concession from Instagram, sort of saying, hey, this didn't really work so well. I mean, I know as a creator, I push out a lot of videos every single week, and I had only done one IGTV video up until this point, which today I'm testing this out on IGTV just to see how it goes, see how people respond to it, see if people like it. I don't really know. But yeah, I mean, that's frankly the only reason, major reason, not the only reason. I'll get to the second reason in a second, but that's definitely the major reason why I didn't publish to IGTV before, because it's hard. I mean, you can repurpose content, doesn't look as good. You can record in a vertical format, but that's just more work. So definitely interested to see where IGTV goes from here. I'm a little bit curious about it. The cool thing is that if you're watching this on IGTV right now, in the feed, you're seeing it, just like small, but if you actually full screen it and, unlock your phone, you can watch it full screen on your phone. So that's interesting. Now, the one other big thing that's keeping a lot of creators from creating content, if you ask me, is monetization. And that's the reason that this episode is not going to be the full episode on IGTV, because I do really rely on my YouTube AdSense money to make a little bit of coin. Now, trust me, it is a little bit for small creators especially, but it is something. Right now, Instagram is not offering anything. So that's kind of an issue. I mean, I would definitely assume the ads are coming to IGTV, but they're not there right now. So it makes it hard to upload full episodes. But yeah, I definitely can't do full episodes because then I'm losing, people aren't gonna go over to my YouTube and I'm not gonna make any revenue. And I think a lot of creators are in that same place. I guess the only revenue method right now for Instagram TV would be sponsorships. So we'll see how that goes. And I'll keep you guys posted.
We have just shared a peek into one of Latasha's past videos. I think the first thing I would love to ask you, Latasha, is when you look back at this particular YouTube video,
yeah,
what's your first impression of it? Like now, like years later?
Yeah. I would say I'm not as like cringe feeling as I thought. I'm like, okay, like I did the best with what I had at the time from a technical perspective. I definitely have technical notes, but I think overall I'm like, okay, like I'm proud of you for going for it. I think the biggest thing personally is I do feel like there is a change in my delivery, like a very different delivery. I felt like I was very nervous or almost like I was playing a part. I feel much less of my personality come through in my previous videos. And I feel like, you know, over the years, it's slowly like started to peak out and I've developed more of my signature style. I inject a little bit more humor and like even just like my personal opinions into things, which I just didn't feel necessarily comfortable doing 5 years ago. Yeah.
What do you think you did right back then?
Yeah. Um, I started the podcast just by sharing everything I knew. I wrote out a list of, taking it to, I think that's my answer is I really took it to the basics. And I think we can all do this. We can all overcomplicate things. And I think especially when you're, 7 years into a podcast, I really overcomplicate it. And sometimes I'll get a question like on email or DMs or something of I don't know, something basic like should I have a personal or professional account on Instagram? Or, I don't know, something very simple like do I need a website? And I'm like, why don't I have a podcast on that? Like that's a good topic that I could really dig into, but it's like almost I'm kind of far removed from that now it seems like it's too basic or something, but you actually need to do the basics. And I think I did a good job of that in the beginning of really kind of documenting all of those simple steps. Whereas now I can kind of beat myself up about, oh, I'm not giving enough value. I'm not advanced enough. But the basic stuff is really helpful.
When you look at your evergreen content, what do you think is it about your particular brand or voice? Or is it a message or certain values or a story? Like, what do you think for you resonates most with your people in particular?
Mm, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know. I'm always like, I have no idea why people are listening to me. And I mean, my most popular video, which I think has close to 1 million views, it's like I cringe so bad when I look at it because I'm like, I hated my outfit. My hair was weird. Like I know those are very like silly things to care about, but I'm like, this doesn't look good. Like from a video perspective, this is not pleasing to look at. And I think maybe that is a piece of it is relatable. I don't think I sure, I want my content to look good and I try to get good equipment and all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, I think I am just a normal person. And that is something I hear from my audience is they're like, I appreciate that you share the lows. I appreciate that you, just share things that you're really struggling with. I appreciate that you don't lead with this kind of clickbait culture of like, I made $1 million and blah, blah, blah. Or these big flashy numbers. I really try. I don't think I try. I think I just am relatable, and I think people appreciate that kind of the real side of it.
Ooh, speaking of relatable, so for me personally, I also resonate with that because I feel like my style slash brand is naturally more on the relatable side. But there is a part of me, not gonna lie, that sometimes thinks like, oh, I wish I was more like aspirational. But
Yeah,
at the core, I really am more of a relatable brand. Like it's
yeah.
just in the way I just feel it more. So for you, like, do you ever grapple with like, for you, is there ever a dichotomy in your head between relatable versus aspirational?
Yes, there definitely is because listen, I always say I know the formula. I know how to play the game. I just don't really want to, in that I know if I do put some of those big flashy numbers on my thumbnail, I know I will get more views that way. Like, if you study some of the top people in my space, That's what they do. And I get it. And I have had some really successful, into in my opinion, impressive wins and numbers and things like that. But I think it all comes back to going back to your values. I think you mentioned that a little bit. That was something actually my therapist encouraged me to do because I was struggling a couple years ago actually when I first started working with her. I took a values assessment. And you can just Google, there's like a free one that you can take online. And it gave me my top 5 values. And basically, I try to really make sure that everything I'm doing in my life is in alignment with those values. If I feel like something is not in alignment, I get this kind of existential crisis, that comes from it. And for me, like my top values are creativity, health, freedom, inner peace. It's not money, it's not fame, it's not any of those things. And I think, yeah, it's important to know what drives you. And yes, obviously I need to run a successful business to stay in business. So I do need to care about money to some degree. But what's more important to me is sharing things in a way that feels good to me, and that feels creative, doesn't give me stress or anxiety when I'm, thinking about how it's being received. So yeah, I think it is really important to just stay in alignment with those things and not like, I think there's a balance. I think there's a happy medium for me of I just want to show up authentically as myself and have fun with what I'm creating. Again, I know that if I made a video on how to make blah, 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 blah every single month, I would do really well. But that content is so boring for me. And I think it's inauthentic in a lot of ways. So it's not going to have the same magic, for me personally, even if it makes me more money.
When you look back at your journey thus far, was there ever a point in time when you did like were tempted to do more of the formulaic things or like
Mhm.
create a piece of content that felt inauthentic and after you did it you're like this really didn't land? Has that ever happened for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think when I look back in like the era of 2020, 2021, I feel a little out of alignment with some of that content now. And I want to be clear, it's not that I don't believe anything that I was like I wasn't, scamming people or lying to people or anything like that. And I honestly don't think it even felt out of alignment at that time period. I think, again, like, if I know none of us wants to go back there mentally, but like going back to those years, it felt actually very good to be very immersed in work because the world was so chaotic. And so I became like a little hustle culture-y. Like it was like, this is fun to have something to focus on and to feel productive. And again, to be helping so many people because audiences at that point in time too, everybody was watching YouTube because everybody was at home. Everyone was trying to figure out how to make more money and, pivot their careers. And so it made sense for that era. But I think, it's so hard for me sometimes to not compare my views or my, success to that time period. But I have to remember like, but I don't want to be working like I was in those years. I don't want to be creating the same type of content necessarily. So again, it's all about like finding that new balance and that new maybe middle ground, if you will.
That really hits home for me because I now I'm just thinking back on my past era, my first era when I
Yeah.
started my own online journey. I was I branded myself around side hustling because I side hustled for a number of years before now pursuing this as my main career.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember there were definitely, and it was during the COVID times, right?
Yeah.
And there were definitely looking back, there was language I used, formulaic things.
Yeah.
I think you would understand where I'm coming from. Like there
Yeah.
were I tried to use monetary results as, a
Yeah.
way to hook the listener in.
Yeah.
And, you know, looking back, I completely resonate with the point about like, it's not like it was out of integrity because we are sharing things that were based off of our experiences.
Yep.
But I think for me, what felt now I wouldn't say or phrase things in that way or structure my
Yeah.
content in that way because now I know where my strengths really, really lie. And I rather lean more towards where my strengths and superpowers lie rather than relying on certain flashy
Yep.
things to get listeners to tune into my work. So
Yeah.
that's why for when I heard you say what you just shared, I'm like, oh, yeah, that reminds me of some stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I know that one thing you've mentioned in your recent content pieces is the idea about helping people create more authority
Hmm.
contents.
Hmm.
I wanted to start there. So what does that even mean? Like for
Yeah.
you and your from your point of view, what does authority content look like?
Yeah. So authoritative content is really about essentially owning a niche or owning a category, being the go-to person for that. If I want to, learn about podcasting, maybe that means I'm going to go to your content or whoever that is. Like I always think of it as if I'm hosting a conference, who are those people? If I have to fill these certain categories, who does my mind go to immediately? And so, yeah, it's really about positioning yourself as the go to, as a knowledgeable expert in that space. And for me, I really do believe that long form content is. I don't want to say it's the only way to build authority. It certainly isn't, but I think it is a really tried and true way. I also think it's easy to create systems around long form content. I know sometimes it seems like it's harder, it's more work to create long form because obviously it's longer, it's more content. But I actually find for a lot of people, especially working people who are running businesses, it's actually easier to like sit down for an hour, have a podcast like this, and then be able to get content for everything else, blog posts, newsletters, short form content, audio platforms, video platforms at once. So I'm a big believer in that strategy when you're looking to get really consistent. Like I said, I've had my podcast for 7 years. And I don't know that I would have spoken on social media marketing world stages or, gotten featured in Forbes without having those 7 years of consistency.
Well, and when someone is thinking about building authority, because I know that is sometimes that can be a very buzzwordy
Yeah.
phrase, like build authority. Um, from your experience, what do you think people tend to get wrong when
Yeah.
they are given the advice like, oh, build authority, and they're like, okay, like how do I do this? Like what are some mistakes you've noticed?
Well, I think that people often think they have to know everything. And again, obviously you should you should know about what you're talking about. I'm not going to try to build authority as like a hairstylist or something because I don't have credentials to do that. But again, you don't have to know it all. Like I built authority by living, just documenting my experiences pursuing this. I started side hustling like you and eventually like people saw me through to being successful by all accounts and as a full-time freelancer. So I think you can share what you know, you can teach, you can help people without knowing it all. Like I'm not afraid to say, "Oh, like I don't actually know the answer to that. Let me see if I can bring an expert on to help or let me see if I can research that or hey, maybe I'm going to recommend another creator or another resource to you." I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You don't have to know everything. And you don't have to try to help everybody either. Focus on who you can help.
Yeah, and I feel like, when I think back on being someone who has followed you for a long time at this point, I'm like, you know what? Like now that I think about it, I think the reason why I saw you, Latasha, as someone who is an authority in the social media, in the freelancing and the content space is because you've built such, yeah, like a substantial body of work. Like
Mhm.
you've, I don't know if consistency, I think consistency plays a part. You've been consistently showing up like week after week for years at this point, but I
Yeah.
feel like it's like this compounding effect of like all the different pieces of content that I've consumed from you or that I've seen pop up from your YouTube channel or podcast that has created this like imagery in my head that like Latasha has depth. She knows a thing or two when it comes to these topics. And I feel like to add on to what you just shared, I think like know what you're talking about, like have experiences that you can base your sharings off of. And I also feel like it's like having those touch points over and over and over again that then
Yeah.
like forge this image in my mind that like, oh,
Yeah.
Latasha is an authority in these certain subject matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I do. I think I always say this too, and it's not to discredit me. It's not to say I'm not talented or smart or whatever, but like honestly, consistency is a big piece of it, because I've seen amazing videos. I've learned so much from people and they have like one video and then, I'm not following them. I'm not buying for them because they just don't exist anymore, in that way. So I do think consistency is such a big piece of it and just that reinforcement and not just consistency in terms of, oh, you're showing up every Friday, but you're also showing up with the same message and you're not diluting your message and trying to do all the things, which I admit I do struggle with because I, like most people who are creative, I'm very multi-passionate. I think there's more to me than just social media or content or whatever. But I do think it is important to really hone in on the things that you really do feel like you can help with and not, mix up that message too much.
I think for a lot of folks who the reason why they are hesitant to share in the first place is because they feel like their viewpoint is not the mainstream viewpoint, and that's why they
Yeah.
are so hesitant to share in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
From your experience, or maybe with the clients you've worked with,
Yeah.
whenever they have a viewpoint that they really want to share, but it may not be the mainstream one, what
Yeah.
would your advice or coaching be for them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can speak to this personally because it's interesting. My second podcast, Content Creator Confessions, that's what I had this idea for it. Emphasis on confessions. I wanted to talk about things that were not necessarily um, always talked about, and I'm doing it with one of my best friends. And so sometimes I feel like I overshare because it just feels like him and I are talking. and like him and I talk about the deepest things, in our personal lives. And so sometimes I like forget it's being recorded. And there's been a couple things, like with the TikTok ban, and I think there was another topic. I can't really remember what it was now, but a couple of things that I'm like, people are going to hate me for this one. why did I why did I say that? But I think it is important to, number one, weigh it out, like figure out, is this going to hurt me? Am I going to lose a sponsorship? Am I going to completely abandon my audience? You have to make those real determinations of if you should post something, or is it going to be something that is going to make me a target for threats, violence, hate speech? It's not worth it to me if I am going to put myself in that position necessarily. So you do have to weigh it out. But I think if it's you just sharing your opinion and it's relatively, harmless in that degree, in that regard, like I think it is important to just, like, I'm 33 years old. I keep saying this. I'm like, I'm allowed to have an opinion, and I think I am getting to that age. Maybe they say like, you get more confident as you get older. And I do. I'm like, I've earned the right and I have the lived experience to be formulating these opinions. I'm allowed to share how I feel. You're just because you're a creator and because you're putting yourself on the internet doesn't mean that you're not also a private citizen who's allowed to have opinions. So yeah, I try to tell myself that, like, it's fine. And honestly, people get, I just remembered what the other topic was. It was AI. Um, that can be a whole heated, people get very heated about that on both sides of it. But what I found is like, yeah, I got a couple of comments that were like opposing what I said, but they came back and watched the next episode and they didn't like oppose what I said in a hateful, mean way. They kind of just wanted to share their opinion, and it's dialogue. And honestly, it got me thinking in maybe a different way. I was like, okay, I didn't really think about it that way. That's interesting. And I think that's what it's all about, is like, let's just exchange knowledge and opinions, and we can take some of it and leave it and move on with our days.
I really like the way you view this. Like it's like a intellectual dialogue, basically. It
Yeah.
really is a dialogue. I mean, like, I think there's a lot of times when people could have phrased things more mm, respectfully, or like just
Yeah.
phrase it better, but ultimately it is in a way intellectual exchange. Yeah, that I don't know why this visual metaphor just came to mind, but it's like in like maybe the scientific world or in the research world, there's oftentimes a lot of differing opinions on like this is like what I think would work. And
Yeah.
everyone's like trying to do their own experiments separately to see like, oh, I'm right, like trying to prove their hypothesis.
Yeah.
And sometimes like maybe both could be right, or there's elements of both, or maybe one person's right, one person's completely off. But like
Yeah.
that was what I kind of pictured when you shared like, yeah, like a lot of times people just have different viewpoints, and it really is just exchanging ideas and different perspectives.
Yeah.
And it's not as bad of a thing for there to be different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be publicly available for us to learn from or hear from. Final question before
Yeah.
we close out. As you are continuing to build this out, how will you know that it's working? Like, yes, like maybe the SEO, the TubeBuddy,
Yeah.
maybe those associations will start to form, but like from an internal point of view, how would you know if
Yeah.
you're on the right path?
I would say if it feels aligned. I think that's kind of my word of the year. Somebody asked me that recently. I think alignment is my word of the year. It truly is. Yeah, to your point. TubeBuddy. Okay, I can look at email list, email list signups and course sales and revenue, and that is important, obviously, in running a business. But to me, it is more important. Like, I'm okay with even there being less money, less email signups, if I feel more in alignment with my purpose. I'm fine with finding that kind of middle ground, if you will. So yeah, I want to just go to work every day and be excited, or at least most days, because it's still work. So let's be realistic. But I want to feel excited about the projects that I'm working on. I want to feel, yeah, excited to create content about what I'm doing, and yeah, just feel in alignment.
So good, so good. And that really is, I feel like the feeling that a lot of us are chasing, and that's why we decided to pursue this entrepreneurship slash creator path, because we want to feel good. Like we actually
Yeah,
want to feel good and like and wake up and like actually look forward to working and
yeah,
work hard, but like actually like the work that we're doing.
yeah.
Fantastic. Alrighty, Latasha, where can people find you and or how can they work with you?
Yeah, you can find all of my links at latashajames.com. My most active social channel is YouTube, and it's just Latasha James as well. So yeah, feel free to find me on there.
Amazing. Alrighty, Latasha, thank you once again for being on Edits History. And to our audience listening, thank you as always for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Many entrepreneurs consume endless podcasts and YouTube videos on how to build authority. And sure, all of the advice makes sense intellectually, but when it's actually time for you to implement, you feel stuck. Right? It's like no matter how hard you try, you either still feel like a newbie in your industry, or you feel like people are only hiring you because you're the cheaper option. But here's the thing. The problem isn't that the advice doesn't work. It's not even that the content strategy wasn't customized to your business, but the actual underlying issue here is that you don't fully trust your own expertise. And because you don't trust it, you don't lean into it. So instead of owning your zone of genius and doubling down on that, you keep playing it safe, right? You create surface level content because you're afraid to go deeper. You hold back from expressing strong opinions because you're worried about being wrong. And you dilute your expertise to appeal to more people because what if you're too niche and you lose opportunities? But here's what actually happens. By trying to be for everyone, you stand out to no one. And I'm sure you've heard that before, right? By hesitating to claim your expertise, you never actually step into authority. So let's change that today. Let's explore one thing you can do right now to start positioning yourself as an authority in your space. And that one thing is to ask yourself a very simple but very, very important question. Am I building my brand around my actual zone of genius? Or am I positioning myself around things that I'm kind of good at but not phenomenal at? Am I building a brand around my natural strengths? Those things that feel effortless, that light me up, that I could talk about for hours and hours? Or am I following what I think I should be known for based on the trends or external pressures or what seem to be working for someone else? Because if you're trying to build authority around something that isn't your zone of genius, it's going to feel so much harder than it needs to be, right? Your content will feel forced, your marketing will feel like an uphill battle, and no matter how much you try to fake it till you make it, you always feel like something is off, right? So for example, in my own business, I could help entrepreneurs with all kinds of content. Short form, long form, social media, blogging, video, podcasting, so on and so forth. But my zone of genius, it is long form content, specifically educational podcasting. That is where I thrive. That is what I'm so good at, right? So rather than trying to be a generalist, I have made a strategic decision to reposition my brand as a podcast content strategist, someone who specializes in helping podcasters and companies create long-form content that builds authority, attracts the right audience, and differentiates them in the industry. And you know what happened when I did this? Marketing became so much easier. Signing clients became easier. Delivering my services also became easier because I was no longer forcing something, right? But instead I was stepping fully into what I was meant to do. So the takeaway here is when you position your business around your zone of genius rather than what you think you're supposed to sell, that's when authority actually happens, right? It happens not just in terms of how others see you, but also in how you see yourself. Because here's the truth. Authority, it's not only about how other people perceive you, but it's also about how you perceive yourself. And when you can start operating from your strengths, you no longer have to fake authority or like convince people to see you as an expert. It becomes obvious, right? And your audience, they want to see you operate from that space. Because honestly, we're all tired of generic, formulaic content and offers and services, but instead we're so drawn to those entrepreneurs and creators who are operating from their unique genius because that's what makes them stand out. That's what makes them compelling. And that's what makes us trust them. So let me leave you with this. What is your zone of genius and how can you start letting that guide you as you build your body of work, your brand, and your business? Because when you start showing up in your zone of genius, that's when you stop being just good at what you do, but that's how you become great. Sounds good? Awesome. Let's get to work. One more thing. If you thoroughly enjoyed this episode and are eager to continue the work, I would love to recommend you to grab the Podcast Content Audit. This is a resource I've crafted to help you audit 9 different parts of your podcast content strategy and identify the specific areas that you can improve on right away to start setting your podcast apart from the rest. The Podcast Content Audit follows our signature framework to building a differentiated and timeless body of work by number 1, becoming known for your thought leadership, number 2, creating immense value for your audience, and number 3, developing your signature voice. You can get the Podcast Content Audit at CherylLao.com/audit. Again, the link is CherylLao.com/audit. Sounds good? Awesome. Let's get to work.